Revolutionary greetings, comrades. I agreed to some comrades that I'm going to write an open letter to the Zimbabwe Minister of Justice, Ziambi, following his utterances on Gukurahundi. I will still write the open letter, only that I've been hectic. I need to sit down and honor that and write an open letter and respond to these utterances by Ziambi, the Minister of Justice in Zimbabwe, when he says Gukurahundi was resolved through the signing of the Unity Accord on the 22nd of December 1987 between PF ZAPU and ZANU PF. I am Ngabuto Nicholas Mapena. Please like this video, share your views about your own understanding about the Gukurahundi and the Unity Accord. And please click that red button, subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you don't miss any of our videos. The Minister of Justice in Zimbabwe, Ziambi, believes or holds the view, like others, that the signing of the Unity Accord resolved the Gukurahundi question. That is off the mark. The Unity Accord of 1987 was a political agreement between the two parties, PF ZAPU and ZANU PF. Historically, these parties had split in 1963 following the intervention of the imperialist forces, as we have said before, who wanted to curtail the influence of the Soviet Union in our region. They had to identify others inside ZAPU in 1963. And they split ZAPU to create ZANU, which of course the ethnic card was used in, to explain the split. And to some it appeared as if the split of 1963 was based on the ethnic question, which is not which was not the fact. So by signing that Unity Accord in 1987, then Ziambi says anyone who now talks about Gukurahundi is advancing the interest of the West. But was Gukurahundi not part of the broader strategy of the West to divide African people and sow the seeds of disunity amongst the African people? And we must also remember that Gukurahundi happened in the context of a Cold War, and also in the context of the destabilization program by apartheid South Africa in its neighboring countries. You remember how UNITA was created and supported by apartheid South Africa. You remember also how RENAMO was created and funded by apartheid South Africa. And the Gukurahundi operated in what we call the military corridor, which was meant to be used by Umkhonto weSizwe, MK, from Zambia through Matabele North and Matabele South to infiltrate South Africa. This is where, in that corridor, military corridor, you then had Gukurahundi operating, targeting civilians. A genocide was committed. This therefore meant that Umkhonto weSizwe, the military wing of the African National Congress, could not use that military corridor as part of its revolutionary act to dismantle the apartheid regime. So Gukurahundi, in part, a part of it being a genocide targeting an ethnic group in Zimbabwe, the people of Matabele land, it was also linked to the agenda of the imperialist forces and apartheid South Africa. This is why when Gukurahundi was happening, or the genocide, Robert Mugabe received accolades from the Queen of England and the other Western leaders. A red carpet was rolled for him. No sanctions were imposed during that time. Mugabe was paraded as an intelligent, progressive African leader. And every African leader was told to aspire to be like Mugabe, a darling of the West. And indeed, ZANU was created by imperialist forces in 1963. This unity accord then gets signed on the 22nd December 1987. When Gukurahundi, or the 5th Brigade, had been withdrawn from Matabeleland. You'll recall that Gukurahundi was signed just a month after the massacre of 16 white commercial farmers or missionaries, New Adams Farm, less than 40 kilometers outside Bulawayo. So the 5th Brigade itself, which used to wear red berets, by November 1987, it has been withdrawn. And by the time the Unity Accord was finally signed on the 22nd of December, it has been withdrawn. But the Unity Accord itself does not talk about the genocide. It talks about, which later on talks about the amnesty granted to the so-called dissidents. And we also know that the dissidents were created by the Zimbabwean state. Yes, there were a few disgruntled Ziprakators. But why were the Ziprakators disgruntled? They were being murdered in the assembly points. They were being murdered in the army. And they said we cannot die in silence in the army. So the creation of the 5th Brigade was not to pursue the so-called dissidents. The state created dissidents together with apartheid South Africa, who created what was called Super ZAP, deployed those dissidents, which it created together with the apartheid state, and it deployed these so-called dissidents in the military corridor that was to be used by MK cadres. And then the 5th Brigade was deployed on the pretext of looking for dissidents. But the whole military operation was targeting an ethnic group in Matabeleland. It was targeting an ethnic group in that if you were arrived at the roadblock, military roadblock at the time, if you spoke Shona language, you'd be let through the military roadblock. So speaking Shona in Matabeleland at that time was a license for you not to be murdered by the 5th Brigade. You needed to speak Shona or to produce a ZANU-PF card. This is why, during that operation, during the genocide, by 1983, the 2/3 of the ZAPU National Executive Committee members was Shona speaking. None. During 1983 to 1987, none was attacked. Yes, we've discussed this in our documents. There were attacks to ZAPU members in the build-up to the 1980 elections. But these attacks started prior, around the split in 1963, when ZAPU members were targeted in Salisbury. But in the build-up to the 1980 elections, ZAPU supporters in Manicaland, in Maswingo, in Mashonaland West were targeted. Their homes were burnt, people were murdered. But from 1983, when the 5th Brigade gets deployed in Matabeleland and parts of Midlands, the 5th Brigade did not visit the home of the late Joseph Msig, who was vice president of ZAPU. But they rounded almost every member of ZAPU in Matabeleland, and some went to hide in Botswana, in Tukwe camp. So this was an ethnic genocide committed by the Zimbabwean state. And Ziambi then says, the Unit Accord was resolved in 1987. And those today that speaks about Gukurahundi are advancing an agenda of the Western world, when in itself, Gukurahundi, genocide, was created in advancing also the apartheid state interests in destabilizing the region, SADC region. So when the genocide or the Gukurahundi blocked the MK military corridor in Matabele North and Matabele South, it meant that MK could not be able to infiltrate South Africa and fight the apartheid state. So in other words, Gukurahundi had two objectives. The first objective was to eliminate the Ndebele speaking, on the narrow understanding that when King Mzilikazi arrived in what is called Zimbabwe today, or in Matabeleland, he fought with the Shona, which is not true. There is no scientific evidence to such, because the land Mzilikazi occupied was the land that was occupied by the Kalanga people. There is no evidence of Mzilikazi fighting with the Shona. In any case, the Mzilikazi delegation split into two. It did not arrive at the same time. This is why his son Nkulumane was installed as a king, because he stayed for almost 2 years and there is people that didn't know where he was. Then because they needed to perform some rituals before the harvest, the chiefs had to install Nkulumane, his son, as a king. So there's no evidence whatsoever of Mzilikazi ever getting engaged in any war with the Shona speaking. This is why again today, Mugabe, Nangagwa and everyone, now Chiwenga, they will say they are related to the Khumalo family. That's not for me to decide or to make a comment on it. When it suits them, they are related to the Khumalo family, fine. But in 1983, they deployed 5th Brigade in Matabeleland and parts of Midlands, and it committed a genocide. When the Unity Accord gets signed, what was then agreed was that structures of the two political parties were going to merge into ZANU-PF. Initially, it was called the United ZANU-PF. There was nothing in the Unity Accord document that spoke about, one, the wreath burials of the victims of Gukurahundi. Nothing whatsoever. There was nothing in terms of building a memorial site in remembrance of the victims, nothing. Recently, President Mnangagwa was in Rwanda and he went to the genocide memorial site. He has consistently refused families to rebury their loved ones. Not only to rebury, but to go to Palakwe and build a plaque in remembrance of the victims. He arrested such individuals. While carrying out the arrest of those that are building a plaque to remember the victims of Gukurahundi, he then calls other people to the Zimbabwe State House and says we must find a solution to Gukurahundi. Then Ziambi says this was resolved in 1987. This is nonsensical. So I will write the open letter as promised to comrades in response to what Ziambi is raising. But it is important to underline that Gukurahundi had two objectives. The first objective was to eliminate an ethnic group, the people of Matabeleland or the Ndebele speaking. The second objective was to advance the interest of the apartheid state in ensuring that the revolutionary army of the ANC Umkhonto weSizwe will not penetrate South Africa. Hence, the operation blocked the military corridor. And of course, today we'll be told about this great revolutionary relationship between the African National Congress and the ZANU-PF. So ZANU gets created by imperialist forces in 1963. It gets assisted by Britain in 1980 to attain political power. It gets assisted by the British, and the British turned a blind eye when the genocide was happening. In fact, Mugabe was rewarded for that. Then, when Mugabe in 1998, after the Conservative Party had lost the power in 1997, and with the emergence of the Labour Party and Tony Blair, then Mugabe sends the army to protect Laurent Desire Kabila in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Then sanctions get imposed on him and Zimbabwe. Part of the Land Donor Conference, which happened in 1998, the British said, we will not support this program until you pull out of the Democratic Republic of Congo war. Thereafter, like any other puppet, he was dumped. Just like Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, they dumped him. Mugabe was dumped, Mobutu Sese Seko was dumped, and other puppets before them were dumped. And the current puppets are going to be dumped by the imperialist forces, because the imperialist forces do not love anyone. They want to use you to exploit your resources. As long as their economic interests are not affected, they don't care about human rights abuse. If today King Mswati of Swaziland were to touch the sugar plantations in his country, he will not survive a week in power. But the imperialist forces, currently they don't care what he does. He protects South African capital in his country, imperialist capital in his country. So the South African capital and the imperialist forces don't intervene, because their investments and the interests are taken care of by Mswati. They don't care if he buys a jet, marries every year, buys his wives, 16 wives, whatever the number, brand new Rolls Royce vehicles. They don't care. But the day he touches those sugar plantations, he will be immediately be called a ruthless dictator, and he will not last a day. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. I've already asked you to write your comments, but as I'm saying, I will write the open letter. Otherwise, comrades, Amandla.